Batman, the world's greatest detective. Spider-Man, the friendly neighborhood wall crawler. Among the annals of superhero history, two have always stood apart. Batman and Spider-Man are among the most frequently adapted superheroes of all time. And most importantly to this video, have a great set of villains, some of the most dynamic and interesting characters in comic history. But what would happen if they switched places? What would happen if Batman crossed paths with Carnage? Would Spider-Man fare well against Bane?
Time to give them the truth.
So look, I wasn't gonna make this video. I was planning on talking about my adventures with Superman instead, but then I made this tweet on Twitter and it blew up, and this just told me, yeah, people want to talk about this. People really are interested in what would happen if Batman fought Spider-Man's villains, and if Spider-Man fought Batman's villains. Seriously, I had friends who don't even follow my Twitter or my YouTube accounts and antics reaching out to tell me why I was dead wrong.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
Or why I was so right.
That's some neat trick. That sense of yours.
Depending on the friend.
Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
This topic is interesting to a lot of people, so why not discuss it? Why not explain my viewpoint here? Why do I think that Spider-Man would have an easier time with Batman's villains than Batman would have with Spider-Man?
They may have trouble adapting to their new environment.
Let's get this out of the way first. We're talking about two colossally different types of characters here. Batman has always been a tribute to the noir detectives of yesteryear. The Shadow, or Dick Tracy, crossed with Zorro in light gothic horror. His adversaries are intellectual threats, broken and crazed figures with obsessions and idiosyncrasies. They may lack powers, but they bring intelligence. On the other hand, Spider-Man is the everyman, and so his adversaries exist as dark reflections of this. Spider-Man's primary villains consists of people who are down their luck, who gain powers they use irresponsibly, geniuses who use their gifts for selfish intent, or the 1%, criminal kingpins or corporate big shots who happen to use their wealth for selfish desires.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
You're out, Norman.
Out, am I?
The Green Goblin, I feel, is a intersection of all of these three ideas.
We all wear masks, Spider-Man. But which one is real? The one that hides your face, or the one that is your face?
Regardless, because of how fundamentally different these heroes are, their adversaries are different. So what happens if we switch their places around? Now, for the sake of discussion, we will take Spider-Man and put him into Gotham, while taking Batman and dropping him in Marvel's New York City. Now, for the sake of argument, we will assume Batman still has access to his greatest superpower.
What are your superpowers again?
I'm rich.
However, neither Spider-Man or Batman will be able to call upon their family or friends for help. Nor will they be able to reach out to their universe's main superheroes for help. That means Spidey can't ask the Flash or Superman to give him a hand, and Batman can't call Hulk over to smash someone up. This means no Oracle, this means no Mr. Fantastic. And also, we're going to focus exclusively on 616 Peter Parker. So no Miles Morales, no Gwen Stacy, no Miguel O'Hara.
Don't even get me started on Doctor Strange and the little nerd back on Earth 1999-99.
And likewise, no Dick Grayson or...
I'm taking you in. Right.
Just base Spidey, base Batman.
Just get those wonderful toys.
Now, for the first part of my argument, the one I think is the easiest to prove, Spidey would have a fairly easy time fighting the majority of Batman's rogues gallery, because most of them don't have any superpowers.
You're saving your fruit. Shut up, you're going to jail.
Sure, Spidey has some incredible abilities, but Spider-Man's greatest strength isn't simply his superpowers. It's also his brains.
Harry tells me you're quite the science whiz. You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Peter may not be as great of a detective as Bruce is, but he is a far better scientist. Because of that, his scientific mind will give him an advantage against certain of Batman's enemies.
Come on, Peter Tingle.
While Batman has incredible stealth, Spidey has incredible awareness. Spider-Man's spider sense will make it very easy for him to avoid being snuck up upon. And while his wall-crawling ability isn't as fantastic as, say, Batman's stealth ability, in terms of sneaking around, it will give him an advantage when trying to infiltrate criminal lairs, avoid detection, etc. Because who's going to look up for a guy crawling on the wall in Gotham? But most importantly is Spider-Man's trickster qualities.
Just let me go.
Is that a knife? Is that a real knife?
Yes, it's a real knife.
My weakness, it's small knives.
Spider-Man is going to trash talk his enemies. And for some of Batman's rogues, that is going to drive them absolutely mental.
Get a clue, Clowny. He's got no sense of humor. He wouldn't know a good joke if it bit him in the cape. Not that you ever had a good joke.
Shut up. Shut up!
For starters, Spidey's main threat in Gotham would not be the Joker. The Joker is basically the Green Goblin without any wealth or super strength. The Joker has a particular obsession with Batman, one that doesn't really transition to Spider-Man.
I don't want either of us to end up killing the other, but we're running out of alternatives.
The Joker and Batman's personalities just mesh too well. They're the best kind of toxic for each other. But Joker does not like it when someone gets the last laugh. Take Terry McGinnis fighting Joker in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. Joker did not take to being the punchline all that well.
Laugh it up now, you miserable little punk. Laugh! I can't hear you!
He does not enjoy someone who doesn't laugh at his jokes. Peter Parker would make the Joker miserable, and if Joker ever tried to go too far to hurt someone Peter loved, Peter's no-kill rule is far less strict than Batman's.
Too weak to send me home to die.
No. I just want to kill you myself.
Attaboy.
Now, the majority of Batman's adversaries are similar to the sorts of figures Peter fights back home. Penguin, Black Mask, even Two-Face. They're on par with Tombstone and Hammerhead in terms of threat level. None of their criminal enterprises are as sprawling as the Kingpins. Catwoman and Peter Parker would honestly probably get along just fine. I doubt Peter would even object to some of Selina's crimes. Killer Croc? Just a weaker, less feral lizard.
Dr. Kirk Carnage, he was a scientist at Oscorp when I worked there. A brilliant scientist. Until he turned himself into a lizard. Then he tried to turn the whole city into lizards. It was crazy.
I threw a rock at him!
So, Harvey, what became of the giant penny?
It was a big rock.
I think where things might get interesting is when you account for adversaries with either a very tactical brain or unusual scientific ingenuity. For example, Mr. Freeze. I firmly believe Spidey would be very sympathetic to Freeze and offer to assist him with raising Nora, what have you. I genuinely would love to see these two interact because I think Peter's humanity and brilliance would benefit Freeze, and I think the two wouldn't actually be on edge against each other as much as you would think. Assuming we're talking about the standard version of Mr. Freeze and not the really bizarre New 52 iteration, then Spidey would just total him. Others, like say Scarecrow and Poison Ivy, would be tougher. Scarecrow's fear toxin would probably put Peter's spider sense into hyperdrive, but given his experience with Mysterio, I think it's feasible that Peter might be able to avoid the toxin altogether, or that his mask might filter out the toxin. Now, Poison Ivy, in terms of sheer power, would be the most dangerous of these new foes for Spider-Man, but again, Peter specializes in superpowered threats. So while Ivy might be a hassle, I believe Peter would win. I mean, best case scenario, Peter could just takes a torch to all the plants. Bane, Deathstroke, and al-Ghul might be the most dangerous though, because let's break this down. They're very intelligent and strong and skilled. Deathstroke is on par with Taskmaster in terms of skill, and Taskmaster can give Spidey a really big headache. But Spidey has beaten Taskmaster before. Further, while Deathstroke is skilled, he's not fast enough to match Peter's reflexes. And with Peter's spider sense, he'd be able to avoid a lot of what Deathstroke can throw at him. Bane is strong, but his strength is a fraction of what Spider-Man often faces. Now, Bane's peak strength I've seen estimated to be at around 15 tons, while Venom or Carnage can lift 50 tons or more. It's Bane's intelligence, though, that would make him a threat, not so much his power. But even then, I think Peter Parker is on par with Bane. After all, Bane's great strategy that beat Batman originally was just break all of Batman's enemies free and wait for bats to come home and use the bathroom at the end of the night.
The beauty of this is its simplicity. Once a plan gets too complex, everything can go wrong.
But unless Bane comes up with a good strategy to stop Peter, a one-on-one fight won't go well for Bane, especially if Peter Parker exploits Bane's weakness, that his Venom gives him strength.
We can't do that, dude. That fucks up our plan.
Well, call him up and explain it to them, Walter. Your plan is so fucking simple and they'll fucking understand it.
Ra's, however, he's the whole package. Brilliant, massive resources, a cunning strategist. This is a person who can take on the entire Justice League. I think Ra's is the only person Peter would have a really hard time with, until Peter reaches Ra's directly, and then in a one-on-one fight, Peter wins.
Victory is yours, detective.
So we've determined that Peter can probably beat the vast majority of Batman's adversaries. It's hard for them to catch him off guard, he's intelligent, and his humor might drive some of them absolutely batty.
I thought my jokes were bad.
I'd love it especially if Peter just refuses to answer any of the Riddler's questions just to piss him off. I would love that. But I don't think anyone was questioning whether or not Spider-Man would struggle with Batman's rogues. The majority of them are humans. They don't have any superpowers. A few do, but even those, it's comparable to what Spider-Man usually faces. No, the big question was Batman fighting Spider-Man's rogues. That's the part that got people upset.
None of us would ever do that to you.
Then you're damn fools.
Because Batman, obviously, he is the Bat God. He's a figure who can stop anyone with prep time, right? Even Superman. But when you really break it down, there's a few problems with Batman fighting the likes of Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Venom, etc. We've come to see Batman as this god who, with a little prep time, can stop any adversary. And this is inaccurate. The myth of the Bat God is one of the worst in modern comics, employed mainly thanks to two stories in the fandom, The Dark Knight Returns and The Tower of Babel.
I've carefully studied every Justice Leaguer, past and present, and created contingency plans to neutralize you, should that ever become necessary.
Now, I've referenced Babel with Ra's being able to take on the Justice League, but the story of Tower of Babel focuses on Ra's taking the contingency plans that Batman has created to counter the Justice League and turning them on the Justice League.
The members of the Justice League are among the most powerful and potentially dangerous people on the planet.
You think one of us would go over to the other side?
Or succumb to mind control? Yes.
This established Batman as a paranoid figure who had a plan to stop any adversary on any occasion.
None of us would ever do that to you.
Then you're damn fools.
Now, a few things to note. Tower of Babel only happens because Batman had time to observe the League on an intimate level, exploiting secrets they entrusted to Bruce. Now, for another, many of these plans worked because they took the various heroes by surprise on an individual basis.
The entire scenario was created to convince you that you made a bad call. But you didn't. You were dosed with a synthesized version of the Scarecrow's fear gas. Because will is the source of your strength.
And fear is the enemy of will.
Bruce's plan was only successful when the League was divided and unable to help each other. Also, Bruce was able to rescue the League from his own plans, and from there, the same tricks don't work twice.
I wanted to remind you to stay out of my way. In all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
As for The Dark Knight Returns, and indeed any story where Batman fights Superman and has an edge, there are a few things to consider. Again, Batman has prep time. He's had years of time to observe Superman and his weaknesses.
It wasn't easy to make, Clark. It took years and cost a fortune. Luckily, I had both.
Also, Superman is unwilling to hurt Bruce. As we see in Batman Hush, Superman, even under Poison Ivy's mind control, doesn't want to hurt Bruce and thus pulls his punches, even through mind control. This makes Superman a surprisingly safe adversary for Batman to fight, because he's never going all out. Whenever Bruce wins against Superman, it's because he's able to snap Superman out of mind control or fight long enough to land a couple hits in. Bruce never puts Clark down forever, just enough to stun him.
You were never a god.
Now, the big argument that you saw constantly with all this discussion was, if Batman gets prep time, he can beat anyone. Now, strangely, they never apply this to other characters, do they? Like Spider-Man, for example. With prep time, Spidey is able to stop Morlun, an energy vampire who was deemed impossible to even injure. He could take anything. He could take any strike to the face and he'd still shrug it off. Morlun feeds on totemic energy, specifically the animal totems that Spider-Man embodies and that Batman also embodies, and could digest it and process it to make him young, like a vampire. However, none of Spider-Man's greatest hits, his biggest punches, his hardest blows, could even bruise Morlun. So Peter realized that fighting Morlun was pointless, but Morlun, when absorbing Peter's totemic energy, was also absorbing Peter Parker's radioactive energy, the radiation endowed upon him by that radioactive spider everyone always talks about. By dosing himself up with even more radiation, when Morlun fed on Peter, that burned Morlun from the inside out, allowing Peter to weaken Morlun enough to subdue him. Now, Batman would not be able to dose his body with that much internal radiation. He would die. He could not survive that. So, someone like Morlun, Batman would have nothing. His gadgets, his weaponry couldn't stop Morlun. You'd have to beat him from the inside, poison him with radiation. And the only reason he'd consume that much radiation is if he tried to absorb Batman's totemic energy, his life force. To a lesser extent, villains like Venom and Carnage can only be beaten with prep time, and even with preparation, Venom has proven immensely difficult to beat. Even though his weaknesses are sonics and fire, in just about all of Peter's fights with Venom, Peter only wins because he has a very clever strategy, and it's always a different strategy. Church bells, playing the symbiote's love for Peter, faking his own death, and these tricks don't work a second time. And even then, some of Peter's enemies are also masters of preparation, most notably Kraven the Hunter.
I'm assured that material is unbreakable.
Kraven is in many ways Batman's equivalent, a man whose only power is immense skill, immense strategy. But while Batman is a detective and Peter is a scientist, Kraven is a hunter, and he uses his brilliance to hunt any adversary, even Spider-Man. And even with prep time, it doesn't always work. The second Kraven set a giant trap for Venom back in the 2000s, exploiting Venom's weakness, fire. And even then, Venom still wins. Even when surrounded by a halo of flame, Venom guts Kraven. And let's be perfectly frank, if we're talking intellect, Doc Ock ranks among the best.
So refreshing to work for a man like Octavius. Backup plans for his backup plans.
The man has no powers, yet manages to constantly outmaneuver his enemies, to the point where he ranks as one of the few villains to claim they thoroughly defeated Spider-Man, and then became Spider-Man.
Such a disappointment.
So, if Batman gets prep time, so do all the enemies that Batman is fighting. And many of them have proven just as talented with prep time as Batman has. And don't forget, Batman has had years and years of prep time against some of his adversaries. This is going to be his first confrontation with many of them. Meaning that he's going to be at a bit of a disadvantage compared to his usual group of adversaries, because he's had no time to prepare. And many of them won't wait long enough to give him an opportunity to prepare.
Oh, Pete? Are you okay? What's happening?
The majority of Spider-Man's villains are significantly stronger than the average Batman villain, and enough of them put Bane to shame. And the ones without strength have tools that make them a threat or powers that make them hard to counter. Now, enemies like Tombstone or Hammerhead, they're standard for Batman. He can take them down. They're criminal enterprises, sure, but they themselves in a fight, Batman wins. Kingpin might be a very interesting adversary for Batman to fight, though, because they are comparable in physical strength, they have comparable wealth, and they have comparable experience fighting adversaries significantly more powerful than they are. Keep in mind, the Kingpin regularly fights Spider-Man, who is vastly stronger than him. But after that, things get harder. Vulture is just a guy in a suit, sure. Mysterio is just a guy with illusions, but both provide the interesting sort of threat that would force Batman to think on his toes. And while I think Batman would win, it wouldn't be as easy as you might think, especially Mysterio, who would use theatrics and misdirection just as much as Batman would. And then there's other villains like Shocker. Being a career criminal, he's definitely Batman's bread and butter, and someone that Batman could win. But while Shocker may be a joke enemy for Spidey, he may have a very successful career in Gotham if he ever went there, because he is so simple but so effective with his tools.
You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
Then there's more powerful ones. Electro, Scorpion. Both are extremely powerful for different reasons. Electro especially. Yes, Electro can be short-circuited and overcharge, but he's also capable of generating EMPs and possesses minor magnetic control, which means most of Batman's metal-based weapons or technologically based weapons would be completely useless against Electro. That means Batman's utility belt can be turned into Electro's weapon while it's on his body. For that matter, Scorpion has a ton of power thanks to his suit, which has only become more lethal since working with Norman Osborn. Assuming Scorpion doesn't have the Venom symbiote, Batman would need to be in a constant state of motion to counter everything Scorpion throws at him, especially considering that Scorpion has no apparent weaknesses. Sandman, he's in a lot of ways similar to Clayface, with one key exception: mass. Sandman can increase his body mass to kaiju-level proportions by assimilating more sand. Because of this, Batman might need tanks and his Batmobile to even leave a dent in Sandman, should it get that bad. The entire terrain can become an extension of the Sandman's body, turning a battlefield into a singular enemy.
Hey, wait! So, I'm a rhino, you're a scorpion, and he's an octopus. What's a Mysterio?
As for Rhino, the guy trades blows with the Hulk. Batman has superior wits, sure, but he can't take a hit from Rhino. He'd have to really be able to maneuver around Rhino and exploit Rhino's lack of intelligence to have a hope of winning. Now, even then, with the majority of these enemies, I still think Batman can win, given enough time to prepare. Many of these villains aren't the kind that really change their strategies ever, except for Mysterio. They're career criminals who use the same means of fighting in any situation. Electro's gonna shock someone, Rhino's gonna charge at them, Sandman's gonna bombard you with sand. Their strategies don't change all that much.
So refreshing to work for a man like Octavius. Backup plans for his backup plans.
But that goes out the window with Peter's heavy hitters: Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Venom, and Carnage.
Just another day in the life. Whoa! What the? Is that Ock?
This is where things get complicated for Batman. At first glance, Venom and Carnage might seem easy. They have easily exploitable weaknesses, like Superman, Sonics, and Fire, and Batman has both weapons on his person, so this should be easy, right? No. Venom and Carnage's vulnerabilities to Sonic and Fire have become less significant as the characters continue to grow. Carnage is basically unaffected by Sonic's now in the comics, with only microwave heat proving enough to stagger Carnage. And even then, Carnage has figured out how to counter most microwave weapons. He's been able to mold his symbiote into the mechanics of the weapons to shut it down before it can even hit him. Venom has been hit with Sonic and Fire weapons so often that he's begun to develop a resistance, enough so that Sonic's can only stagger Venom, but unlike, say, many of the films, not be enough to beat him on its own. This means that Batman would need multiple measures to stop Venom if they fought, which, at this point, good luck.
You'll see us everywhere, even in your nightmares.
That said, I don't think Venom would actually fight Batman, since Venom is so particularly obsessed with Spider-Man, or at least was before he fought Knull and became a literal god being, so it's not likely that Venom and Batman would fight. But Carnage, that's a different story. Carnage possesses all of Joker's mania and vastly more strength.
Between the two of us, there won't be enough left of Spider-Man to fit in a matchbox, but we'll try, won't we?
Now the interesting thing is that Batman and Carnage did fight once. In the Spider-Man and Batman crossover comic in the 90s. Carnage teams up with the Joker, the two of them fight, Batman and Spider-Man team up to fight the two villains, they trade enemies. But while Spider-Man just dispatches Joker with a few punches and it's pretty straightforward, Carnage is a little harder for Batman to fight, and the comic writers seemed to realize that, because the way they have Batman win is absolutely ridiculous. Now, if you've read the comic, you know what I'm talking about, but Batman exploits Carnage's inherent fear of death, which has never happened in the comics otherwise, and if anything, has been directly argued Carnage doesn't really have much of a fear of that, because he's been to death's door and back multiple times. Carnage has also taken immense psychic damage before, and not only survived it, but was able to strategize a way to counter said psychic damage. Back in Maximum Carnage, he's blasted with what is essentially a love beam, something straight out of Sailor Moon that's supposed to make all these people feel guilt and affection, and Carnage resists. Carnage is resistant to his paranoia, to his internal mania. The Sentry rips Carnage in half and drops him through the atmosphere, and he still comes back. Carnage is very hard to subdue. Carnage is a figure that can put the entire Marvel universe on watch, on his own. He's had multiple massive crossover events where Carnage himself is the main antagonist. Batman, even with prep time, would have a very hard time stopping him, in part because Carnage has found ways to overcome the vast majority of his inherent weaknesses. It is not as simple as, say, the movies or the cartoons will have you believe. Carnage is a difficult adversary to put down.
You say?
A lot of people cite the time Batman shot Darkseid in Final Crisis as proof that no one can stop Batman, but that scene is taken out of context. The bullet stopped Darkseid's physical body, yes, but only after the entire Justice League took part in a massive strategy to give Batman one opening, one that resulted in Batman's immediate obliteration thanks to Darkseid's Omega beams. Yes, now he was sent back in time and time travel and all that, but he was beaten. He only got one shot, and he made that shot count, but he didn't walk away from it.
You dare!
And even then, Darkseid wasn't beaten by that one strike. It just left him vulnerable to Superman, who attacked Darkseid's true essence. So no, Batman on his own can't stop any adversary. He needs prep time, he needs friends, he needs companions. But on his own, Batman is not indestructible.
Well played.
I think the three adversaries Batman would have the hardest time fighting, however, are Doc Ock, Goblin, and Kraven the Hunter. Yeah, Kraven the Hunter, Batman's opposite in Spider-Man's Rogues. I think that would honestly be the fight to watch if Batman switched places with Spider-Man, because they are equivalents of each other. They are both out of their league in a world full of the greatest heroes of all time, and are still able to hold their own, to be a threat. That's interesting.
Beautiful. But you still hold back. Kill or be killed.
They would prep, they would observe, they'd have multiple encounters to figure out the best ways of countering the other's strategies.
You think your fancy new suit's gonna save you?
Doc Ock is a brilliant scientist. He's able to counter any tool Batman throws at him. And as for Goblin, well... Take Joker's mania, Lex Luthor's brilliance, and the powers of tech on par with both Spidey and Batman, and you get the Green Goblin. Batman struggles with Lex Luthor in No Man's Land. No Man's Land proves that Batman can be outmaneuvered by a brilliant businessman. Gotham is bought out almost entirely by Lex Luthor, an effort that he leverages in a bid to become president. Luthor is the sort of villain that Batman and Superman need help to stop, and Goblin is just as ruthless, having leveraged the events of Secret Invasion to become the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. Add to that incredible power, incredible cruelty, and Batman, yes, even with prep, I don't see Batman beating the Green Goblin in a one-on-one fight, because the Goblin will be observing Batman as Batman observes the Goblin, and will create a countermeasure to stop him. Yes, Goblin is insane, but he's also very clever, and that cleverness is dangerous. So, what's the point of all this? Where's the end game with this conversation? I mean, there's surely a point to this. I'm not the kind of person who just cares about these battles, right? Who beats who? What does it matter? Well, here's the point. Stan Lee was once asked who would win in a fight, one superhero or another, and his answer was, it doesn't really matter who it was, because the answer is the same no matter who it is. Because Lee's answer was, the winner is whoever the writer wanted to see win. And ultimately, all these fights where you throw heroes into the ring or villains into the ring, like they're action figures, the winner will be whoever the writer wants to see win. But there's a problem with that. The problem is that one character can be written dramatically different in one story versus another. Compare however Captain America is written in his own comics versus in other superheroes' comics.
The price of freedom is high. It always has been. And it's a price I'm willing to pay.
This uniform shows up in Mexico bashing heads in with you. It sends a message.
That you stand with mutants. Unless you don't now.
Gotta do this by the book, Rogue.
In other heroes' comics, Captain America is often the Boy Scout, the one who sides with the country. We saw that to an extent in X-Men 97, for example. But in his own comic, he's often anti-authority. He's often questioning the government. He's often fighting the government. His whole Nomad arc is him in protest of the American government. And that's to a lesser extent with the MCU because it's more of a solitary vision. But, you know, the idea remains. When a character is written outside of their usual setting, they can be written in vastly different ways. Another idea is look at Spider-Man's villains. Look at Venom, for example, a character who with two key vulnerabilities. In one issue, we can see Venom plow through a massive amount of sonic punishment, fires and flames all over the place, and he can just plow right through and he's good. But in another issue, Spidey can just light a newspaper on fire, and that's enough to send the symbiote flying into the sky away from the flames. You know, like Dracula with a crucifix. And Batman, who has only one power, that he's rich.
I'm rich.
Is even more subject to this variety of power set than Venom is.
I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
Bruce!
In one issue, Batman can be challenged by Ra's al Ghul in a sword fight, and the two are evenly matched. In another, he's clobbering Superman.
They taught me the world only makes sense if you force it to.
The two are not comparable events. Batman's skill level is inconsistent. Now, a hero is only as interesting as the struggle they need to face in order to win. Now, Batman's whole conflict is that he is always one step away from becoming the very thing he fights.
It's too hard to cross that line. No! God Almighty, no! It'd be too damned easy.
Batman has said multiple times that his no-kill rule only exists because he fears what might happen if he ever takes a life.
All I've ever wanted to do is kill him. But if I do that, if I allow myself to go down into that place, I'll never come back.
If he crosses that line, he doesn't know if he'll ever be able to come back. So most of the conflicts with Batman, it is him as a detective, him as solving a mystery, him as investigating, yes. But it's also the idea that Batman's morality is always put on the line. Whether it is empathizing with his villains, trying to help them out in some way, or fearing that he is one step away from becoming as bad as his villains. And most of his villains exist as perfect foils to Batman in some way. al-Ghul, he is Batman's drive to stop crime taken to a fanatical degree. The Joker is one bad day. He is what could have happened to Batman if he let his trauma send him over the brink. Two-Face, another figure, a crime fighter who was traumatized, who lost everything in the pursuit of fighting crime and went over the edge. And you can go down the list of every single Batman villain. Bane, another great foil. They're all foils for Batman directly, taking some component of his characterization and distorting it in a way that is compelling and interesting, but not necessarily spectacular to watch in a fight.
Bruce. Good old Bruce. Always there. You never give up on me.
Two-Face doesn't have any inherent abilities that makes him particularly harder to fight in a fight than Riddler. The difference there is the psychological game between Batman and Two-Face. That's what's interesting.
He's right. You're always there for him.
Yes. Just like you're always there for me.
Hey, what are friends for?
We see Batman often struggle with his emotions. He's always one step away, yes, but the Bat family brings him in. One of the great things with Tim Drake is when he's introduced is we hear Tim Drake say that Batman needs a Robin to keep him centered, to keep him from going over the brink. And that idea is so essential. Batman's family, the Bat family, is what keeps Batman from ever going too far. I think it's a beautiful concept.
What's this?
Training. Hand-eye coordination.
One-on-one?
Cut to the Justice League. Batman stands apart as the weakest member of the team physically. He does not have Superman's strength, nor Wonder Woman's power, or the Flash's speed, or the Green Lantern's versatile abilities. So how does Batman contribute?
I'm rich.
Well, to compensate for his lack of strength, writers have elevated him to the Bat God, the hero who with any amount of prep time can stop anyone. He has a vast amount of technology. He's basically become, in some stories, the DC equivalent of Iron Man. A character with no inherent strength, but a great brain that can solve any problem. But this is not interesting to me, personally, because Batman's whole thing is he's a detective. He's great at stealth. He can sneak up on his adversaries. He plays a sight game. Where's the fun of seeing Batman come in with a tank? That to me is boring. It's more interesting to see Batman sneak into a crowded facility, take out a target in a way that minimizes violence, that minimizes the amount of damage and destruction, while engaging in a psychological battle. It's not fun to watch him plow in with the bat wing that blows everything up, even if it's a wonderful toy. It's just not as interesting to discuss, and it's not as interesting to watch, and it pulls Batman away from the gothic noir of his character and into the more technological cyberpunk dystopia that an Iron Man story would occupy, which simply isn't as interesting to me.
Get those wonderful toys.
On the other hand, Spider-Man is a perpetual underdog. He's always struggling, both as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man. If he were selfish, he could use his powers to profit, but he knows the danger of doing so. He knows what will happen to those he cares about should he act selfishly. And so his adversaries manifest that change, either as an oppressive force that can ruin lives or as underdogs hoping to profit on their own. The key difference between Batman's villains and Spider-Man's is that Batman fights manifestations of mania and obsession, while Spider-Man fights people who are defined by power, either the pursuit of it or the exploitation of it.
We don't need you to save us. We don't need to be fixed. These are not curses. They're gifts.
Peter tries to help his adversaries in ways that are very tangible. Sandman has reformed multiple times. Peter tries to reason with Harry just as much as fight him. Venom isn't even considered a villain anymore, in part because of the many times Peter has actually tried to help Eddie more than punch him. And at this point in time, Eddie's basically a hero in his own right. This vulnerability is what makes Spidey compelling and never ridiculous, because after all, if Batman can fight Darkseid, then who cares if he can fight Penguin? What's really at stake? Spider-Man is always on the back foot. No matter who he fights, no matter who he confronts, he never wins easily. He always wins at great personal risk. Whereas Batman, depending on the story, either wins handedly or barely wins at all, and it's never consistent as to what enemies push him to his limits.
Let her go.
Very poor choice of words.
Now, on the other hand, Spider-Man has always been powerful. One of the strongest of Marvel's main heroes. He's stronger than Captain America by a lot. He's not Hulk level or Thor level, sure, but he is very powerful. And people forget that a lot. Yet he never feels overpowered, especially not in his own stories. And that's because he's fighting adversaries who are either more powerful than him or have a power set that's hard to just confront with sheer strength. But also, he's rarely the linchpin in events when, say, Thanos or Galactus shows up. There's always someone else who's better equipped to fight those cosmic threats. Though, bizarrely, as we saw with Null, when Null, the symbiote god, invaded, some of Spidey's adversaries, like Venom, are that linchpin. Someone like Norman Osborn in the Secret Invasion storyline is the linchpin to solving a cosmic, giant crossover event. But Spider-Man himself, not so much. And that puts Spider-Man more at a disadvantage because his adversaries can have universal ramifications for their actions, whereas Spider-Man himself seldom does. And that makes Spider-Man feel vulnerable despite how greatly powerful he is, because his adversaries can accomplish so much. What can Spider-Man do against that? It's interesting, it's clever writing, and it manages to balance out Spider-Man in the hierarchy of Marvel's characters in a way that Batman, I do not believe, is balanced out. Batman Hush is among the best Batman stories of the 2000s. It offers the definitive portrayal of Batman and Catwoman's romance, elevates the Riddler to peak villain status, and provides an opportunity for all of Batman's main villains, save for the Joker, who appears briefly to get beaten up and provide a red herring, to shine in one way or another. But it also does something else. It provides the best Batman and Superman fight in comics. Now, I did mention this before, but Batman doesn't really beat Superman in Hush. He snaps Clark out of Poison Ivy's mind control by having Catwoman drop Lois Lane off a building and stunning Clark with a kryptonite punch. Batman fully admits that he's only alive because Clark doesn't want to hurt him, but that Batman does want to hurt Clark in those instances. And even then, it's only a matter of time before Poison Ivy's mind control influences Clark to punch too far. Batman punching Clark once almost breaks every bone in Bruce's hand. It's a fight where Bruce wins because the solution isn't overpowering, but outmaneuvering. Also, Batman always needs a friend to beat Superman, whether it's Green Arrow in Dark Knight Returns or Catwoman in Hush, and it takes years of planning, again.
It wasn't easy to make, Clark. It took years and cost a fortune. Luckily, I had both.
Batman is no god. That's where Batman, I feel, shines the most, when he's given the chance to outmaneuver an adversary enough to beat them on an intellectual level. It's also a game that puts Bruce in extreme danger. Danger that, should things go slightly different, would be fatal. And that's the problem with the Bat God. It removes the angle of vulnerability. Batman with prep time can be a threat to any adversary, but things often, in good stories, go wrong, go unexpected. He may pursue a red herring. He might not account for something in particular. And then it comes down to Batman's skill to get out. His ability to think on the fly. And that's interesting.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Because if they didn't have these elements, Batman would be a very boring character. The reason the Joker is such a threat to Batman and basically no other major DC superhero is that the Joker always plays Batman's game, or at least subverts it in some way, in a way Batman isn't always anticipating. It's proof that Batman's greatest strength, his brain and his wealth, don't always get him out of situations that are dangerous. And again, the Joker doesn't have any cosmic powers. He doesn't have a massive ultimate nullifier like Mr. Fantastic has. He just has wits and cleverness, and that's able to counter Batman in a game of clever chess.
I don't want to hurt you. I don't want either of us to end up killing the other. But we're running out of alternatives.
Joker has tried fighting other heroes, and it ends badly for him. Usually he's like swept aside. He goes to Metropolis, and Superman stops him in seconds because he can hear the bombs ticking in the city. He can use X-ray vision to see Joker's mechanisms and stop them before Joker even declares they're a threat. And because of that, he can even hear Joker's plans as he's walking into the city. So Superman isn't going to worry about Joker outside of, again, the Injustice comic line. But the problem is our perspective of heroes are defined by a few stories. Superman's entire history was reshaped by the Injustice game, a non-canon Elseworld story where Superman becomes a fascist because Joker pulls one particular trick. To the point where, for a decade, every mainstream depiction of Superman outside the comics drew from this story. This resulted in a boring, dull cycle that we're thankfully only now breaking away from, starting with stories like My Adventures with Superman, where we see Superman as just a guy, a charming, lovely person.
With every building he drains and...
People are getting hurt, Lois. I had to try.
If Batman can ever be beaten, he'd be a dull character. By emphasizing Batman's physical and emotional vulnerability, you make a more compelling hero.
When I told you that if Gotham no longer needed Batman, we could be together, I meant it. But now I'm sure the day won't come when you no longer need Batman.
Look at it this way. What separates Two-Face and other Batman villains? The trauma. That's it. Not power, not strength. The emotional angle, again, is always more compelling than the brute strength a villain provides. The same is true for Spider-Man, but Peter's vulnerability seems an integral part of both himself and his villains. Like, seriously, look at the villains that Spidey faces on film. The vast majority of them are sympathetic to one degree or another. Some, like the Vulture, are so sympathetic that people kind of root for them. There's a reason why most of No Way Home isn't spent fighting villains, but Peter trying to rescue and help his adversaries. And in almost every single case, by the film's end, he succeeds, at great personal cost. I think any discussion of superheroes that ends with them punching out the bad guy is short-sighted. It renders every single villain a bland shell of what they could be. As much as I enjoyed the Marvels, for example, it's undeniable that its biggest flaw was needing there to be a bad guy to punch. And what's frustrating is how good the villain almost could have been. She's a Kree, a victim of the main protagonist, Carol Danvers. The villain only exists because Carol Danvers destroyed the Supreme Intelligence. Her life was ruined when Carol came. To her, Carol is the villain. And while this is discussed, all interactions with this villain start and end with, stop the bad guy to save the worlds. We don't see Carol and her engage in an intellectual discussion. We don't see them discuss their trauma. We don't see the pain between them. We just see a bad guy who has to get punched. And all this potential is gone. All the interpersonal conflict is between the heroes. But the emotional crux between the villains and the heroes, it's relayed when the heroes and villains are in separate areas. Carol, Kamala, and Monica just talk to themselves about the bad guy. Or the villain is off to herself monologuing. Or we never see them actually engage intellectually. Not until the very end where she decides to rip a hole in reality. So her passing is the closest we ever get to any real discussion or engagement with how these characters have affected each other. But compare that to any of the Spider-Man movies, or even that one conversation in the Batman where Riddler and Batman are talking together, or in The Dark Knight where Batman and the Joker are talking to each other. A scene like Peter Parker slowly realizing that the Green Goblin personally has overtaken Norman right before he bashes Spider-Man through 14 floors and just, blows up Aunt May. That one moment of stillness communicates so much more about who these characters are without a single punch needing to be thrown. Though the punches that follow are very entertaining. All of that is lost if we just stopped at the question, could Batman beat up the Green Goblin? And that's the whole story. It's not that interesting anymore, is it? If there isn't that intellectual game at play.
And why do you want to kill me? I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you?
This is another key element to Batman's success, his mind games, because he's a detective first. He always starts the story a few steps behind the antagonist. The fun isn't watching Batman win. The fun is watching Batman catch up, figure out what's going on. The very idea that Batman is 4 steps behind is interesting. The idea that Batman is already 5 steps ahead is boring, because at that point we're just watching the blocks fall into place. This is why The Batman is so interesting, but The Dark Knight Rises fails. In The Batman, we see Bruce struggle to catch up with the Riddler. And in fact, he gets a few key things wrong. He's too slow to stop the Riddler from blowing up Wayne Manor. He's too slow to stop the Riddler from blowing up the flood walls around Gotham. And that forces Batman to act in ways that's interesting. Whereas in The Dark Knight Rises, Batman's body is broken from previous fights, so he just fixes it with new tech we never see he had, that he just pulled out of thin air. Okay. Batman's thrown in prison and has to, on the other side of the planet and has to get out. Oh, he does. Oh, okay. Well, then he has to get to Gotham, a city that's been closed off from the rest of the world. Oh, he's there. Oh, he's just there now. He just showed up. And then he has to stop Bane and his army. Oh, he just charges at them and punches them a lot. See how that sounds so much more boring than the Riddler? And the Riddler isn't a physically stronger threat than Bane. In fact, Riddler's plans are much less complex. There's no nuclear weapons. It's just a couple explosives and a few assassinations, and that's it. And it's more compelling and more of a threat to Batman than Bane is, despite Bane's strength, resources, etc.
You mean you didn't figure it out? Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
The difference between The Batman's Batman and The Dark Knight Rises Batman is that one is a bat god who can just do whatever he wants because he's Batman, while the other is a very talented detective who starts the game on the back foot and has to push forward, and succeeds despite the odds and setbacks. And one is a great film, while the other is a disappointing finale to an otherwise great trilogy. Spider-Man's accomplishments, despite his vast powers and intellect, are always remarkable because the appeal of Spider-Man is watching someone who is always downtrodden succeed. But to make Spider-Man look weak, his enemies have to be incredible, so the sliding escalation of power increases, resulting in an array of powerful adversaries. It makes this story fun to watch because, on one hand, the hero is struggling emotionally. On the other, he's also struggling intellectually, physically, and even economically.
If you were good enough, maybe Tony would still be alive.
So the point of this whole challenge is to show that the Bat God is the worst iteration of Batman, and Batman himself needs to be in a constant chess match with his enemies, rather than start by default fully capable, fully invincible.
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Batman is an incredible character, yet the way his fans talk about him on the internet, he sounds so boring.
I've carefully studied every Justice Leaguer, past and present, and created contingency plans to neutralize you, should that ever become necessary.
Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
Batman isn't an invincible god, he's a detective, he's a strategist, he's cunning, but he's not invincible. The worst Batman stories make him into this unassailable figure. Just like the worst Spider-Man stories are the ones that neglect Peter's humanity in favor of something absurd like clones or making deals with the devil. Let's use this knowledge to tell better stories, to focus on the characters in ways that elevate their strengths and weaknesses rather than completely circle the drain and continue to repeat these boring, dull ideas. Also, Venom is great. Let me know if you want me to do a video essay on Venom, because genuinely I will. This character is great, fascinating to me.